my mother Laurel Eden from Eden Consultancy Services. Today we're just doing a short video for you to provide you with psychological techniques to use for dealing with repetitive, negative, unwanted thoughts.
Repetitive thoughts, you mean perseverating thoughts? Or
what are perseverating thoughts?
They're thoughts that reoccur all the time that you actually can't master, and it actually happens from a very young age. When you think about it, even when you were little, you used to start to count the cracks in the pavement and went on and on counting the cracks in the pavement and couldn't stop doing it. So perseverating thoughts are thoughts that kind of get carried away and keep on rotating in your head and not going anywhere.
So sometimes, I've got a song that will go over and over and over in my head and it gets really annoying and I want it to shut up. Is that a bad thing, other than that it just annoys me a bit?
It's not bad in itself, no. And it depends how much it annoys you and whether it's intruding on other things.
So perseverating thoughts are kind of normal. It's a normal way that the brain works, and just getting caught in a loop. And what we're talking about is sometimes those are thoughts about remembering an experience or going over and over something that you've had a problem with. For me, just recently, the election result was taking 2 weeks to come out, and I was checking it every day and thinking about it over and over and over again, and I couldn't do anything about it, and it was driving me nuts. So if you've got some thoughts like that you actually don't want, or they're not helpful, what are some techniques to deal with that, to get rid of them?
Well, the most obvious one is to change the subject, and that's fairly difficult to do because we all know how the brain sort of balks at that and won't do it. So, or to do something manual, to do something almost like a factory line where you actually have to do something and complete a task and more or less stay on task. Otherwise, you'll forget what you're doing, in what order you're doing it. So that's one way. So that's probably the first way. But often the brain will conquer you on that, and something physical where you're puffing, for instance, walking up a hill at a sharp pace. It's fairly hard to have perseverating thoughts when you're walking up a hill at a sharp pace. So they're probably the two first things to do, to try those two things.
So doing a repetitive manual task that requires a bit of focus, or say some exercise that's building your heart rate where you're puffing and you're actually having to sort of focus on the body and the breathing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one that you told me a while ago that worked really well for me, and it's the rubber band on the wrist. And so what you said was that when that thought comes up, snap the rubber band out to remind you to snap out of the thought. And I certainly wouldn't recommend this for anyone who is at risk of self-harm, because what I actually did was that I just kept snapping it and snapping it until I had like a red welt, and I had to change the rubber band to the other wrist. And when I did that, I thought, look at the damage you're doing to your body. That's the damage that I'm doing inside my body by having those thoughts. And because I had to swap the rubber band to the other hand, it just got to the point of ridiculous, where I was just, this is really damaging me and this is really ridiculous. And I did find that snapping the rubber band helped just remind me to snap out of it.
And I think it's interesting you say it got to the point of being ridiculous. There's sometimes when the ridiculous can become funny. Anything that you can make into something funny nearly always diverts you, because it's another way of looking at things, another way of looking at something. And I guess the other one with snapping the elastic band, it actually invites you to notice when you first start the thought.
Yes.
In other words, you get much better at picking up the thought really early on before it's sort of entrenched. And here we go again. Okay, you're at sort of 0.1 or 0.2 of the thought rather than 0.10.
That is such a good point, because that was exactly what the rubber band did. It reminded me that I didn't want to continue with this thought because it had become like a record repeating. And so I didn't even get down the track of the thought. And then the other technique that I use is that I'm basically literally building and designing a castle, a magic castle. And it's really quite boring, and I get even detailed as to what colour the tiles are going to be or something. So I'd snap the rubber band, stop thinking that thought, and then go to what colour are the tiles going to be in my 5th bedroom of my castle. So it was helpful to have a sort of a mundane thought to replace the perseverating thought with as well.
I think we have to remember there's always good in anything. I mean, we're actually talking about perseverating thoughts as being bad, and yet, funnily enough, one of the treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder is to go over and over and over the trauma until it almost loses its power. So, in other words, that's a case where perseverating thoughts that are guided perseverating thoughts are actually useful. So, in other words, sometimes it's useful. Sometimes you're problem solving. Sometimes the perseverating thoughts are actually problem solving. So, am I problem solving, or is this just tiresome, the same sort of thing? So, defining that first off is probably useful. And another way is to count. And if you count backwards from 100 by 7, you really got to think. And then if you're really clever at that, you're a good mathematician, and you're counting backwards by 100 and doing very well at it, well, change it. Go 7, then 6, then 5, then 4. I guarantee that you can't stay thinking the perseverating thought when you do that. And in fact, you'll annoy yourself. And so that's another good way of getting out of it.
That's a very good idea. And thank you for reminding me of the post traumatic stress and actually going over the trauma, because I wanted to do a later video with a self hypnotic technique that also will help with that. So we might finish this conversation about perseverating thoughts today. Thank you very much, Laurel.
Pleasure.
Bye.